Hey everyone, this is Mr. Young, and you are watching The History Helper, the channel that's all about helping you with history. Today we have the Second Industrial Revolution. We're going to break down that into two parts, part one being the Gilded Age. Part two will be our next episode, our next unit, and it will be the Progressive Age. I forgot for a second, but it came back to me. All right, so let's talk about the Gilded Age. So the Gilded Age is between 1870-ish or so and 1901. Why does it stop at 1901? Because Teddy Roosevelt becomes president and he starts changing things. The Gilded Age is going to be a time when just really out of control stuff is happening. And the government's not really doing anything to stop it. All right, so for instance, right here, these kids, they're not off to school. They're off to work. Get a job, you. And so they're going to have, it looks like they're working in the mines. And yeah, those hats, those catch on fire. So often, a lot of times, you have kids like this, they're probably breaker boys. And what they do is they go into the mines and they got a conveyor belt and they're standing over it with hunched backs and they are moving the different pieces of coal or whatever it is that they're working on, probably coal. And they're breaking up the big chunks. They're taking out the stuff that's not good and tossing it. And sometimes their hands would get caught and there goes an arm and there goes a kid because they're off on the conveyor belt and they get crushed. And this is the way it is. They do not have workers' comp during this time period. They do not have a lot of concern for the health and wealth of their employees. And so we're going to see that during the Gilded Age, even though there were many people becoming very rich and many people becoming quite famous, in fact, because of the wealth, we're going to have a lot of problems because the working class, they're not getting wealthy. Oh, they have jobs, but they don't pay well, and often it's difficult. It's going to be very difficult for them. All right, so the Gilded Age, here we go. The presidents during the Gilded Age are these gentlemen right here. U.S. Grant, of course, and we talked about him during Reconstruction, as well as Rutherford B. Hayes. But what about James Garfield? He gets shot. Chester A. Arthur, Grover Cleveland, the only reason why I think Grover Cleveland is interesting is because he got elected again. He was president 2 terms, but not in a row. That's the only president that can say they did that. Benjamin Harrison then is next, and of course William McKinley, and he got shot. So we have 2 assassinations going on after Abraham Lincoln. So 3 assassinations there in 60 years. And after McKinley gets shot, we have Teddy Roosevelt coming in as the new president, and he's going to start the Progressive Unit because he's all about that change. All right, so the Gilded Age. Where in the world do we even get that word? Well, the Gilded Age term comes from a book written by Mark Twain. So we have Mark Twain, as well as this other guy, who wrote a book. It wasn't the greatest thing, but Mark Twain was not a big fan of things. He was especially not a big fan of the government. I believe he is quoted as saying, suppose you have an idiot, and suppose that idiot was a member of Congress, but I repeat myself. That's how his view of the government was, pretty much. And he coined this term, the Gilded Age, basically to mean a time period where it looks all wealthy on the outside, but when you look at it up close, it's actually a lot of rot underneath. It's like when you have a piece of jewelry that's made out of tin, and so you go and you put a layer of thin gold or something. So suddenly that piece of jewelry looks, ooh, how nice and fancy, but if you scratch away the surface, you'll see, oh, it's cheap and not so great underneath. So that's what we're talking about. It's a period when corruption existed in society but was overshadowed by the wealth of the period. Gilded is when something is golden or beautiful on the surface, but it's really cheap, worthless underneath. All right, we're going to have abuses in business and government, and this is going to cause problems for immigration, for laborers, for farmers, etc. All right, let's move on. During this time period, though, we are going to have a crazy amount of inventions and inventors. And, of course, these people are going to make a nice, pretty penny because of it. Thomas Edison, for instance, he perfected the light bulb. Notice how I said that he did not invent the light bulb. Because the light bulb was actually invented, it just didn't really work. He's the one that created the filament, right? Him and his team created the filament that lasted longer so that the light bulb could actually be something useful. Of course, he perfected the light bulb as well as the motion picture, so now we can actually have home movies during this time period. He organized power plants. He was big on a certain type of electricity, AC and DC, right? And Tesla was the other guy. And so Edison and Tesla, boy, I tell you what, they hated each other. And they believed that the different styles of current, one was better than the other. I believe that Edison was a DC man. We also got Alexander Graham Bell with his telephone, Henry Ford with the assembly line. Notice I did not say he invented the car. The car was invented before him, but he did come up with the assembly line, which allowed that car to be made super fast and for a lot cheaper than the other guys. And Henry Ford actually paid his employees fairly well. He was a decent industrialist, which we're not going to really hear about that much in this time period. We got George Eastman with his camera. Now we got a lot more photos because this invention in this camera. Of course, the camera was already invented. It was just he perfected this handheld type camera. Samuel Morse with the telegraph. Of course, that was way early on in the 1800s, but it's being utilized all the time until the telephone will eventually overtake that. Kind of like today's cell phones. Everyone has a cell phone, which has overtaken the wall phone that your grandparents used to have on their wall. All right, so we have the typewriter, the radio, of course, the Wright brothers with the airplane. That's all happening during this time period. So we have some changes going on in the daily life. Between the 1860s and 1890s, the government issued almost 500,000 patents, licenses that gave an inventor the exclusive right to make, use, and sell an invention. Typewriters, telephones, new types of cameras, phonographs, motion pictures, to name just a few. Power stations across the country provided electricity for lamps, fans, printing presses, lots of different applications. I tell you what, that's a game changer right there. Electricity is the power source now, because before that, how are you going to create an invention? Steam, right? You're going to have to burn coal, burn fuel, burn something, and it's going to create pollutants, going to have some air quality problems, and your machine's going to have to be fairly big, right? Well, not anymore, right? Electricity has solved the problems, and now they're able to create all these other inventions because now they got a power source, electricity. By 1900s, there was 1.5 million telephones in use all over the country, and Western Union Telegraph was sending nearly 63 million messages. On the outside, America looked rich and powerful, but on the inside, we had a lot of poor people struggling just to make it, which often led to an increase in the cities and urbanization, and this is the Gilded Age. So we can't get started with business until we really talk about railroads. Railroads, I tell you what, Vanderbilt is the guy that is in charge of the railroads. He's not in charge, he just bought up all the railroads that he can possibly get because he knew what it was going to eventually become. Railroads are like the Amazon of that time period. Okay, how are you going to get your stuff shipped? The railroad, right? It doesn't matter what you are, what company you have. You need shipping purposes. Trucks, big gigantic trucks, overhaul trucks like we see today with semis, not really the thing yet, but those railroads are, and those railroads are going to cause you to pay those railroad companies big bucks to get your product shipped. So if you owned all the railroads like Vanderbilt tried to do, then you're going to get crazy wealthy, and you can charge the people whatever you want to charge. So what are the benefits? Well, it stimulated the growth of other industries such as steel, iron, coal, lumber, glass, helped the cities grow, because if your city was where the railroad went through, forget about it. It's explosive growth. Helped increase westward expansion of America. Of course, we talked about that during our westward, the Old West unit. And of course, we talked about time zones, why we needed time zones in our Old West unit. Now, where's the corruption? Well, obviously you can charge much higher rates when you own those railroads. And of course, that's what happened with the Transcontinental Railroad going through towards the west. All of those farmers that went out for homestead during the Homestead Act, they're going to have to be at the mercy of that one railroad company, right? So we also have this scandal going on. Now, we talked about the whiskey ring scandal and Reconstruction for President Grant, but he also had to face this, a credit mobilier scandal. And what's that all about? Well, it's the Union Pacific, which is a railroad line. It's fake construction companies and bribes, lots and lots of bribes going out, basically to make some transportation roads for the railroads. And that's gonna take down not that many members of Congress as you would think, but it does certainly taint President Grant's. Again, the same with the whiskey ring. All right, moving on. The steel industry. Now, here's the deal. The Bessemer process develops around 1850 or so, and basically that's injected air into molten iron to remove out the impurities, and that's going to make steel. Steel is going to be a lighter, more flexible, rust-resistant metal compared to iron. And steel is used in railroads, farm equipment, canned goods. Skyscrapers are going to be built. Brooklyn Bridge is going to be built using steel. And the steel industry is going to be enormous. There's a man named Andrew Carnegie that is going to basically have the monopoly on steel. He just saw how important steel was going to be, and he started up his steel factories as fast as possible. And he made a lot of money. Now, there's this man, J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, let me tell you what, is probably one of the biggest names in business during this time period. It's the Jeff Bezos of Amazon, right? It's him. J.P. Morgan was an industrialist who, he didn't start U.S. Steel from Carnegie Steel. He bought Carnegie Steel, and then he started basically this huge monopoly of U.S. Steel, I guess. And he bought all these other steel companies because he realized too, like Carnegie, oh wow, this is huge. And he paid big bucks to Carnegie. He paid like $480 million, which is a lot of money in today's terms. So imagine it going back to then. It's like when I heard George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney for $4 billion, right? All right, so we have the first billion-dollar corporation here with J.P. Morgan. He used to be a banker, and he actually still owned banks, and that's how he got his power and wealth. He built out the U.S. economy on more than one occasion. He was bigger and more powerful than most senators put together. Now for Andrew Carnegie, is the guy over here on the right at the top. Andrew Carnegie was an industrialist who made a fortune in steel in the late 1800s, and he was also what is known as a philanthropist. A philanthropist who practiced philanthropy. What does that mean? Well, that means he gave away a lot of his own money. Andrew Carnegie built Carnegie Hall in New York. He built sections for schools and universities and hospitals and things of that nature. He believed in the gospel of wealth, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. John D. Rockefeller did not. John D. Rockefeller, although, in New York, you ever heard of Rockefeller Center? Yeah, that's named after John Rockefeller. So Rockefeller was an industrialist who made a fortune in the oil refining industry, such as U.S. Standard Oil. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've never heard of U.S. Standard Oil. Is that still in existence today? No, it is not. The government eventually would break up Standard Oil because they realized what an enormous monopoly it was. And Rockefeller, let me tell you what, he absolutely destroyed his competition. No, he literally destroyed his competition. By hook or by crook, he was going to get your business. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So that is why often these captains of industry were known as the robber barons as well. because they had these big, gigantic businesses, and these businesses would take a bunch of different companies and make them into a trust, right? Basically, think of it as a monopoly, okay? So he has a bunch of these captains of industries had their bunch of different trusts, and they basically are controlling the government. They're controlling senators, and the government is absolutely hands-off. Critics call these practices unfair and said the business leaders were robber barons because they ruthlessly drove their competitors to ruin. They paid their workers meager wages, and they forced them to toil under dangerous and unhealthy conditions. So they're basically getting rich off of the backs of their employees. And you can see how this political cartoon looks at trusts, right? They are pushing Uncle Sam off the plank because, look at that, they took down the flag of America and are putting up their pirate flag, which is the trusts, right? So we have two different things. We have vertical integration and horizontal integration, also known as consolidation. So let me explain what the difference is between these two. We have vertical integration, which is a process in which a company buys out all of the suppliers. Coal, iron mines, ore fighters, railroad lines, etc. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail here in a second. And horizontal consolidation. This is a process in which the company buys out or merges with all the competitors, right? So vertical integration, you buy out all the suppliers. Horizontal consolidation, you buy out all your competitors in the same company, right? JP Morgan bought out Carnegie Steel, and then he bought out all the other steel companies, and he made that U.S. Steel. So let me show you here in this little graphic. Horizontal consolidation is basically this. I have a bunch of independent refineries, okay? This is one business, this is somebody else's business, this is somebody else's business, etc., etc., etc. And then comes Standard Oil. Well, Rockefeller, he's going to figure out a way to get your business. He's going to figure out a way to destroy you if he has to. If you don't want to sell your business to him, he will go behind your back and he will try to buy up all of the stock in your company. And once he has 51% of your stock, he's now the guy that owns your company. You're fired, and he's going to take over the company and make it Standard Oil. Now, if he can't do that because, you were smart enough to have at least 60% of your own stock, well, then he's going to figure out a way to still put you out of business. He will open up his own oil companies near you and basically undercut you so much that you can't afford to stay open anymore. And there you go. So there's some way he's going to figure out a way to get you out of business or to own your business. And that is why John Rockefeller is often nicknamed John Wreck-a-Fellow. And that is horizontal consolidation. That is like his arms reaching and grabbing, gimme, 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 right? Whereas vertical integration or vertical consolidation, this is what Andrew Carnegie did, right? So what Carnegie did is he went and got the coke fields, all right, for iron ore for his steel. And then he got the iron ore deposits, and then he developed those into steel mills, and then he got the shipping, whether it's by railroad or by ship. And basically, that's all different companies, in a sense, all to give him his steel that he wanted and a way to send his steel out to buyers. And so that is vertical consolidation. You're not buying up all the steel companies all over the place like JP Morgan did. You are vertically, from bottom up, figuring out a way to save money, because look, he's not having to worry and argue and negotiate with the shipping companies. It's his own shipping company, so he's going to charge himself the best price possible, right? All right, so we'll move on. So, Gospel of Wealth. Carnegie was so wealthy, he believed that some wealthy people are chosen by God. This is also known as that philosophy of some wealthy people are meant to be wealthy because God wants them wealthy. That was known as the social Darwinism, right? And he also went with the Gospel of Wealth. In fact, he wrote a book called The Gospel of Wealth. And basically he said, hey, rich people, you are responsible to look out for the well-being of the less fortunate. So you should share your wealth, not necessarily directly, but indirectly, like, start museums and maybe some hospitals, etc., etc., different things of that nature. So, of course, we know what a monopoly is, in case you haven't figured that out, right? It's not the board game, no. If you've never heard of the term monopoly, that is a business that owns all of that one type of business. Let's say, for instance, your cell phone. What if there was only one cell phone provider, not just in your neighborhood, but in all of the United States, right? Or all of wherever country you're in. And it was Verizon, let's say. Verizon is the only it's the only company that can give you cell phone service, and that's it. You can't go to Cricket, T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint. You can't use whatever, Butterfly Network, whatever it is that you got going on where you live. It's Verizon. So what do you think's going to happen to your bill? I'll let you think about that. Go ahead and talk it over with your shoulder partner if you want to. We'll be back here in a couple seconds. Yeah. If you said, yeah, my bill's going to go sky high, they're going to charge me whatever they want, that's exactly right. Because they're a monopoly. You don't have competition, so, too bad. Where else are you going to get your cell phone service? Nowhere. So we're going to charge you whatever they want. So that's why that's not a good thing, and that's why the government eventually would stop doing a laissez-faire policy, the hands-off policy, and they'll start to regulate business. But that does not happen that much during the Gilded Age. So we got this social Darwinism that I mentioned before, and it's basically using Darwin's theory of natural selection, the survival of the fittest, to say that some people deserve to be rich, and poor people, well, they deserve to be poor for whatever reasons, mental capabilities or culture or whatever. That was a theory. All right, so we talked about laissez-faire, and we talked about the captains of industry. So there we go. So we can see right here we got Carnegie Hall, Carnegie Library, Vanderbilt University, all examples of philanthropy by, those gospel of wealth loving guys. It's political cartoon time because we are ending the Gilded Age Part 1 with these political cartoons. Often we're going to see an octopus representing Standard Oil. So let's look at what those labels are. It says Standard Oil on top of the octopus. And we have a Standard Oil cartoon based on Ida B. Tarbell's book, The History of Standard Oil. And we'll talk about Ida B. Tarbell later on when we talk about the Progressive Age. All right, so once again, I'm going to give you some think time so that you can give your opinion of what you think this cartoon is all about. What is the issue, and what do you think the artist's intent is? We'll be back in just a few seconds. All right, if you needed more time, I just assume that you would just pause this. But yeah, I agree if you said that Standard Oil Company, this big beast, is out of control. Because look, he doesn't just grab up these other oil companies. He's grabbing the government. He's manhandling the Congress there, and he's got some senators in his pocket right there. Well, not his pocket, but his tentacles. I don't think octopuses have pockets. Very few animals have pockets, except for the marsupials, of course. All right, so let's go on. It's obviously a negative. The artist's intent is to show Standard Oil Company as this beast that's out of control. Now we'll move on. Here we go. We got Andrew Carnegie. So let's read the caption. 40 millionaire Carnegie in his great double role. And so let's read. It says Carnegie. It says, notice wages reduced 20% to his employees. And over here on the right-hand side, he is giving out $5,000 to somebody. I can't quite make it out, but it might be Carnegie Hall, might be a library. It's his idea of philanthropy, right? So, once again, I'll give you a few seconds to discuss that and figure out what is the artist's intent on this. I think it's showing the duality of captain of industry, robber baron. So, yeah, he's not so great to his employees, right? And he then makes sure that people see, oh, I'm a good guy, I'm a nice guy, right? It definitely it definitely doesn't show him in the best light, but it does show the duality of his nature. All right, so that ends part 1 of the Gilded Age. I don't know why it just says S there. That's weird, right? And we're going to be talking about the Gilded Age in our next episode. So make sure you click that link, subscribe, so that you can get updated. We will have all of U.S. history on the channel here very soon. From Reconstruction to the West, to the Gilded Age, to Progressivism, World War I, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the hits of today. So we're going to have all of those things, so make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe so that you can get those updates. And yeah, please feel free to leave me some comments below. What did I get wrong? Nothing, of course. Thanks for watching. We do appreciate it. If you were able to use this in your classroom, why don't you give me a comment below, let me know.